Welcome to In This Moment. I'm Janet Stovall, DEI strategist, joined by organizational culture expert Khalil Smith. We tackle the urgent questions in management and inclusion, exploring what's next and what you can do about it today. We're so glad you're here with us. Let's dive in.
So today we're talking about something every organization is dealing with, but most are handling badly. How do you have difficult conversations at work when people are emotionally charged and politically divided? Here's a stat that'll get your attention. Workplaces lose over $1 billion daily just from incivility.
Because the reality is we're operating in polarized spaces for the next 24 months. Actually, let's expect it to be longer than that. And 1 in 3 workers face political conflict at work. Just last year, 1 in 5 are actually avoiding their coworkers because of their political beliefs. Companies that teach employees to communicate across difference are the ones that are going to thrive. Those that avoid the difficult conversations, they are going to face dysfunction and they're going to lose talent.
Absolutely. And we are lucky today to talk to Allison Schlobohm. She's an associate professor at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. She works with students, faculty, and businesses. She teaches courses on managing and communicating in turbulent times. And her research focuses on the rhetoric of racism and how language shapes our understanding of the world. We're excited to welcome Allison. Let's get into it. So, Allison, thank you so much for being with us. I want to start first with just like, what is next? As you know, we've been talking about what's next and what's now. In the next 2 years, what's coming down the pike for companies and for all of us as individuals as we think about communication and courageous conversations and all of that? What are you seeing in the next 18 to 24 months?
As the midterm elections approach, we're going to see a really big jump in kind of extreme rhetoric around what America is and should be about, who is and should be included, and how organizations should be responding to that. We're already seeing this occur. Of course, it was all laid out in Project 2025 on a political level, and it's being executed. But the midterm elections are so important for determining whether or not the current administration is going to be able to accomplish everything it wants to, that we're going to see a lot of energy being put in. And sometimes it's going to be hard to tell what's real and what's not because of this move towards AI, move towards deep fakes, conspiracy theories popping up. And so we're all going to have to exercise a lot of discernment about what it is that we want to pay attention to, even as the noise gets louder and the heat is hotter.
And so even beyond some of that, what do you see as the biggest communication challenges? So to your point, this pressure cooker is continuing to go, there's going to be a lot going on. Is there something that you would say, regardless of where we land in the next 12 months, looking out 24 months, this is the impact that it's going to have on workers and the workforce and companies? Is there something that folks should be thinking about or planning for that 24-month out?
Yes, I think organizations need to be ready to have people back off, stop speaking, check out, sign off, and not bring their ideas or their full understanding of how the world operates to work with them. So we're going to have to figure out listening. And we're going to have to figure out listening not only to what workers and leaders are explicitly saying, but also listening to the context that people are living within, putting our ear to the ground and really understanding what's going on so that we can start to try and predict the issues that are going to be the most prevalent and pertinent for the people at work. Because the environment I just described breeds distrust, it breeds fear. And it breeds a desire to close off and feel safe. And especially in workplaces where we're seeing a constant turmoil in terms of how our budgets look, whether or not layoffs are happening, whether or not we're being supported through grants. And so these conditions are going to make it really hard for people to feel comfortable sharing ideas, especially ideas that might be against the grain.
Well, we did a little research getting ready for this. And one of the things we uncovered was that in the week before an election, productivity can drop and well-being goes away, and it can cost about 900,000 in just a single week. And that banning political talk can actually backfire because it raises teen conflict over a third. So, I would imagine a lot of companies and a lot of organizations then say, well, let's just stay neutral. Let's just avoid these conversations. Is that a good idea? Is it
Good
possible?
luck.
Good luck.
There you go. Good
I
luck.
mean, I think that what you end up doing there is creating a vacuum where anything can actually pop in. And so I'm going to see your statistic and raise you one. In 2024, global employee engagement fell um, up to levels kind of the same as COVID 2020, and it cost the economy in the world $438 billion. And that's because engagement was dropping. So we can't just say don't talk about things. That's expensive. But we also can't say only talk about these things because you're going to miss what's relevant to people and it's going to pop out, So another statistic that I wanted to share was that according to the Society for Human Resource Management, U.S. workers experienced 208 million acts of incivility at the end of 2024 per day.
Per day?
According to per day. The For those who experienced those acts of incivility, 56% of them said it was related to political viewpoints in some way or another.
And Allison, how do you think about those acts of incivility? So for somebody that's listening and they're like, what does that look like? What does that sound like? How should I think about an act of incivility? How would you kind of frame that or describe it?
And I would ask this to add on that.
Yeah.
Is how is that different from a microaggression?
Ooh, okay. Well, I think that, let's define it all, right? And so when I think of acts of civility, I'm thinking of rude or incivility. I'm thinking of rude, offensive, antisocial comments that really ding somebody else and put a ding in your day. And it can be related to anything, right? So maybe I hand you my part of a project and you say, "Oh, I can tell you really worked hard on this one." That's rude, right? But to take it to the other extent, a microaggression is really related to someone's social identity group and a group that they belong to, such as their race, gender, sexuality, ability status. And it's those small everyday ways that we are intentionally and unintentionally putting people down related to those identity groups. So if I were to then turn in my project and you were to say, "Well, I can tell that you were really up all night with the baby, and that wasn't, you weren't able to give this all of your," then all of a sudden you're bringing my gender, you're bringing my parenting status into this, and that's where we're hitting microaggression level.
Okay. Okay. That's interesting because it seems like it might be hard sometimes to tell the difference. I don't know that it matters to the person who's the victim of it. I don't know if it matters to them at all, but it sounds what you're saying. So it sounds like you're saying is it's really a matter of what is the source of the person who's the aggressor? What's the source of that aggression? Is it just general because your mama didn't raise you right and you don't have manners? Or is it that you got some bias? And so they might look like the same thing. I guess my question would be, you know, is there a different response for either? Is there a different way to think about them? Is there a different thing to do about them? Or do you, as the person who maybe they happen to, or the person who has to deal with all those millions that you said that happen during the day, is your response and the way we need to think about how you deal with them, is it the same?
Well, I want to go back to does it really matter? And I think it does, in the sense that the emotional energy we spend trying to determine if something was said to me because the person is just generally rude versus the person is sexist or racist, that's exhausting. And we spend a lot of our time trying to figure those things out, right? Why did they say that to me? And that energy matters. I think that it almost, the big saying we're all familiar with is impact is not the same as intent. What I intend to do is not the same as my impact. And so from the person saying it, is it because I have a bias that was ingrained in me from when I was young, that my mom stayed home? There was always comments about how that's what my mom needed to do because she wasn't prepared to enter the workforce. Or is it that I am just insensitive? Maybe it doesn't matter to you where it's coming from. Maybe you don't even know. But to the person receiving it, it's very easy for that to become an exhausting calculation of figuring out whether or not they belong. And it can really lead to those imposter feelings that are so rampant in the workplace for some people. And how to respond to this? Ooh, I think part of it is just recognizing kind of inner sense of strength and confidence that I belong here. One way that we know you can undo the impacts of microaggressions is micro affirmations and micro self affirmations. So I'm going to tell myself every day, I belong where I am. This place it may not be built for me, but I'm here and I make it better. It can Glennon Doyle says, I can do hard things. Whatever it is that these little things we can do to remind ourselves that this space may not be intended for our success, but we have an internal locus of control and we can still create that success in the ways that we desire, even as our options are constrained. I would never deny that our options um, are constrained. And beyond micro affirmations, I just want to say one more thing. It's really crucial that we find communities where we belong, where we are embraced and valued for all of the things that we are. And a lot of times that means going back to our communities of origin, having spaces outside of work that we can go and be ourselves, that we can really get that pump that we need to show us that we belong wherever we are.
And clearly, I'm going to shut up a minute and let you talk, but I got two things I want to
No,
say.
no, go.
One, I love your answer because what you said was micro affirmations and go find your people. What you did not say that here's assume positive intent. I don't assume positive intent at all. I listen to what you say and I assume you meant what you said. So I'm so glad you didn't say that. But I want to go back to, because what you did was you gave that person the agency to deal with. I mean, you can always cuss them out too, but that's probably not the best way of doing it. But either way, that's agency. So I appreciate the fact that you said that. But I want to talk something you said too that I love that you said, and this is going to be funny because when we did for each one of these, in case everybody doesn't know, we talked to our guests before to figure out kind of how we're going to go, and we had a great conversation. And Allison said, "Is it okay for me to disagree with you?" I said, "Sure, we want you to disagree." Because for those who may not know it, I'm working on my second book, and the title of it is Belonging is Bullshit. And so Allison, of course, did homework, read that, and I said, that's where we're going to disagree. But what I love that you just said was your concept of belonging was a concept that I don't think is bullshit. Because what you said was go find your people and figure out how to make yourself belong. And I think that for me is okay. I struggle when we talk about belonging as being something that organizations create or do for you. I look at psychological safety sometimes and go, eh. And so I'm really glad you said that because I don't think we disagree on that. And I don't think we disagree on that. But I know you said you're going to disagree with me. So I would love for you to disagree with me on that one.
Get
Why
in there. I would
not
love that
bullshit?
too. Disagree, Allison. What do you disagree about?
Well, I think that the reason I'm so against the idea that belonging is bullshit is because it is actually the desire to belong that connects us all as human beings. It's one thing we all share. The sense that we want to belong is, in fact, what makes us belong to each other because we all have that sensation. And so that is extremely powerful. And we all deserve that feeling. I truly believe that. There's a book by, and I'm going to mispronounce her name, but Sebene Selassie, who's a meditation specialist, called You Belong. And it opens with kind of the physics of belonging and this deep desire that we have to belong. So I don't think it's bullshit in the sense that I think it's extremely important. We're social animals. A sense of belonging is key to our mental health. We can see what happens when we don't have it. Where I do agree with you, so I don't know if this is going to be the knockdown drag out maybe everybody was hoping for, is that the move towards belonging that we see happening in the wake of anti-DEI efforts is a move to make this work apolitical, a move to make this work seem inevitable and easy, when in fact, deconstructing the systems that make belonging so challenging for many, many people in the workplace is hard work, it's uncomfortable work, and right now, it is potentially illegal work depending on what you're doing. And so there's a certain amount of bravery that's required to hit real belonging as opposed to belonging as the safe route that we can take when we feel scared.
And once again, I love what you said there because what you said again was what I love is you always put the onus on You don't look to you. You're not telling an organization you can create belonging. What you're saying is people need it. And see, where I say it's bullshit is like, but organizations can't create it. What they have to do is be inclusive so that people have the opportunity to belong. And I think what happens, to your point about how we've changed it, and we'll talk a little bit about, how our conversation we said too about why organizations are choosing what they want to focus on because they don't want to deal with the difficult stuff. But I think where belonging is a challenge and where it's been a challenge for me is I feel like a lot of organizations use that as a neutral and easy, a fuzzy way to not deal with the real work. Because the problem is systemic change. You fix a system and people will feel like they can belong. But they don't want to do that. They want to say, no, we want to create a space of belonging. And what does that look like? Because my response is, to whom does the space actually belong? Or we want you to have a sense of belonging. Okay, what you gonna do to make that happen? Oh, nothing. You just want me to have it. Just come in here and have it. So I love the way you said that, is that the need is there. There's no question. That's not bullshit. What's bullshit is how I think organizations expect to meet that need. They don't really want to do that. They just want to say that rather than saying we want to change the system. We want to create a space of belonging. Well, what that's sort of like an interim goal. That's the ultimate goal. How are you going to get there? That's where I think is the problem. And with that said, I know I'm gonna shut up after this. That also in our conversation, you mentioned that, what is the big thing that people are talking about? The what's next. Everybody's talking about what's next is AI. And is that maybe we know it's there, but is there maybe some other reason that that's what everybody wants to focus on now?
I would think that if you're facing two major disruptions, you're going to go with the one that's more comfortable to discuss. And right now, there's a major disruption in terms of how we do or do not value and respect one another. And then there's this other major disruption of AI. If I have to pick an emergency, I'm going to pick the one that feels solvable, not the one that feels impossible. And yet we have to deal with this. I mean, if for no other reason, AI is crap when we don't actually have diverse teams building it. We've seen this over and over again. And so they're not actually even that separate. It's just I think we're really facing a lack of courage, unfortunately, right now.
Well, it's an interesting conversation because talk to us about courageous conversations. You say a lack of courage. And I know courageous conversations is something you've done a lot of work around, a lot of efforts. You've talked just in this conversation around, a locus of control and how you can lean in and how you can, take on some of the things that are uncomfortable. So talk to folks about what are courageous conversations and why are they necessary as we think about all of this conversation that we're having.
Yeah, I mean, at a very basic level, a courageous conversation is any conversation you need to have courage in order to engage in, which I think that, we all have these every day. It's like, oh, am I going to tell my partner that I accidentally broke the plate that we bought for our wedding? Ooh, that's courageous, right? But what I'm referring to is the type of conversations, what my co-author, Dr. James Johnson here at the University of North Carolina as well, are really talking about are those conversations that business leaders need to be having in order to confront the countless elements of turbulence that are impacting business today. I mean, just
So, Allison, you've been talking a bit about kind of courage and locus of control and things that organizations and individuals should be doing. And I know that you have been deep into quite a bit of research and conversation around this idea of courageous conversations. So can you talk a bit about kind of, for our listeners, what is a courageous conversation? How does that factor into this discussion that we're having about what organizations and individuals should be doing?
yes. And thank you for the opportunity to talk about this. I I want to first just say we're having a different kind of courageous conversation all the time. So one way to think about courageous conversation is a time when something's at risk or you're putting something on the line. And so, for example, if I'm going to ask someone out on a date, it might take some courage in order to do that because things could go south, right? But the types of courageous conversations that I want to make sure organizations are having and preparing people to have are around these hot button, politically polarizing issues that are essential to confront in order for us to have any sort of business success. And so, for example, a courageous conversation that we need to be having in society is what is the role of diversity, equity, and inclusion in organizations in a moment where it is being politically attacked and erased from a lot of organizations' priorities. Do organizational leaders still have a responsibility or a necessity to advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion internally or externally? That is a courageous conversation, because if I express my opinion on that and you disagree with me, you could immediately put me in a box and decide you're never going to trust me again. Right? We take people's opinions on these types of matters very seriously as representations of their values. And when we view someone as having different values than us, it can be hard to work alongside them. And so when we have courageous conversations in the classroom, or when we have courageous conversations with organizations, we try to institute structure as a way to remove some of that inherent risk while still getting at those really important complexities that we need to understand in order to thrive.
So can you tell us a little bit about what some of that structure looks or sounds like? So if somebody wanted to employ some of that, because I hear you say that, and I also think about what you and Janet were discussing in terms of incivility. And I imagine that when there are, kind of this clash of values, and things like diversity, equity, and inclusion have started to become about values. What do you believe? What do I believe? What do I see on the news? What do you see on the news? And so simply having that conversation may lead to a clash of those values and a perception of incivility. But you're talking about doing so in a way that doesn't soften it or wrap it in kid gloves or make it, fundamentally easier or, defang it altogether, but does make it more likely that the conversation, the courageous conversation, leads to a productive output. So how do we do that in a way that's not just get in a room and fight it out and everything will be fine?
Yeah. And I would say it's actually more likely to not happen at all if you don't institute some structure. So let me share two examples from the classroom. So as the listeners, viewers may know, I'm a professor as well as a professional facilitator and communication coach. And in the classroom, I teach undergraduates and graduate students, and I institute this courageous conversation framework that I'm going to share with you in all of my classrooms. And after the election in 2024, things were challenging in the classroom. Some students felt really happy. Some students felt really attacked. And yet we all needed to come together and figure out how we were going to move forward. And in order to kind of get at this, I had two different classrooms, two different classes. And in the first class, I just opened conversation one day and I asked, should we talk about politics in the business communication classroom? Not let's talk about politics, but should we talk about politics in the business communication classroom? From the outside, you might have thought the conversation was going really well. Several students were expressing their opinions. People were really engaged. Some students were really passionate, but only one person disagreed and said, no, we should not. And to me, that means the conversation wasn't going very well. Because if I have 7 students passionately saying, yes, we should, and one student saying, no, we shouldn't, and that one student expressly stating how uncomfortable and scared they were to share their opinion, then that means there were a bunch of other opinions in that room that were not getting shared because people felt afraid of disagreeing. So I learned my lesson, and I thought, I've actually developed a tool to help avoid this scenario. So in the next class, I implemented our courageous conversation model, which I'll try to walk you through quickly. I have an infographic, and I think it's available in one of the links that I've shared. And the idea is that the leader of the conversation separates people into 2 categories. They are either for or against. And it's a purposefully binary position so that we have to find complexity and dialectics between them. So in this example, I divided my classroom into, yes, we should talk about politics in the business communication classroom, and no, we should not talk about politics in the business communication classroom. And I assigned their positions. People did not get to raise their hand and decide which side they were on. And I also said, you don't get to say, this isn't really my opinion, or I have to say it this way. And the first step is, and anytime we have these conversations, is establish some ground rules. What are some cornerstones for conversation that we need to have in order to have a productive conversation? And one way to get at that conversation is first ask, what makes this so scary? And then what are things we can agree to make it less scary? And something that always comes up on these ground rules is assume good intent. But then you'll have some students, just like Janet, say, I'm sorry, but I can't do that. And so then we shift it to say, state your intent. If you have a good intention, state that. Say, I'm really operating from curiosity here. I don't want to make any assumptions, but I'm trying to understand. I know your intent, so I can move forward from there. People also are really adamant about not interrupting a personal growth area of mine, in case you haven't noticed. Also, students frequently will state that they don't want one statement that they make to be a reflection of who they are as a person, especially if it's a rough draft. If this is just the first time I'm trying out this idea. So we establish these ground rules, and then everybody's in their side. The yeses, yes, politics belong in the business school classroom, talk amongst themselves for 10 minutes in front of the other group. So the no group has to listen. That's all they can do. They cannot speak. They have to listen. And it's important that they listen because the next 5 minutes is the no group asking questions of the yes group. And it has to be a question. And we really encourage and teach how to ask open-ended questions. And sometimes I have to intervene and someone will say, well, but didn't you
Isn't it
don't you
true
believe
that? And you're like,
yes,
yeah.
exactly. Precisely. And so I'll say, and the question is, and then they're like, oh yeah. And then they switch roles. And the no group gets to talk amongst themselves for 10 minutes. And the yes group then has 5 minutes asking questions. And you'll notice at no point in that is it, let's disagree. I'm listening and I'm asking questions. And then only after we've gone through that, the participants get 10 minutes to openly talk with each other. They can either drop their position or maintain it. And only after that can I, as a facilitator, share my perspective. And when I implemented this in my second classroom that day, what an amazing conversation that we had. Because it turns out we're all actually complex human beings. So I might be able to see both sides of that issue. And I might be able to see both sides of that issue much more clearly if I force myself to step out of the identity that I have put myself in terms of the type of thinking I tend to do, and instead challenge myself to think differently. And so that complexity gets us somewhere so much more valuable and so much more interesting than if we all are just sitting in a room agreeing with each other because the people who disagree are too scared to share.
Yeah, it's fascinating that you start from a place of kind of this binary, you must be on this side of the conversation or the other, but through curiosity and listening and questioning and truly doing so with a willingness to be changed, you're encouraging everyone to kind of see the complexity in the positions and the discussion. And I think, that is a huge part of what we're all trying to do, which is to stop reducing these things down to a binary. That, Janet and I have talked about this a ton. There are some activities that happened under the umbrella of DEI that we'd probably look at and be like, that wasn't helpful, right? And there are a lot of other things that we would look at and say, but if you throw all of it away, we are losing massive amounts of progress and the opportunity to include folks. And so it's not a binary, yep, everything we've done for the past couple of years was totally right and 100% of, appropriate, but it feels like people get backed into those positions where we wind up going to some degree of an extreme because it is either, if I'm on this side, I need to defend everything that is on this side. And if you're on that side, everything you believe is wrong. What you are creating a structure around is stop pushing people out and start pushing people in or drawing people in.
Stop making it so dangerous to raise a dissenting opinion. And it makes sense that it feels dangerous. I started with talking about all of the things that are happening that make it feel really challenging for us right now. And identity is powerful. It is huge. We talked about this with belonging, but we have to still find a way to find complexity, to find curiosity. If we only let ourselves sit inside of comfort, we're never going to get there. And so we have to exit the binary in order to find something new, to find something positive. So Howard Smith was a clear white supremacist who was responsible for amending the Civil Rights Act to add sex on top of race, color, ethnicity, and religion. And there's a lot of exploration about why he did it. One argument is that he just wanted to torpedo the bill, and he knew that if he added gender equality, that would be a great way to make it not happen. I find it very possible that his fundamental belief that white people deserved more than Black people meant that he did not want white women to be left behind, Black men or Black women who were receiving the benefits of affirmative actions. But a third way to look into it is looking at the works of the feminists who ended up creating alliances with him and helping him get to the point where he was interested in making that claim, right? And so basically, there was a group of feminist activists and lobbyists who recognized Howard Smith's flaws and then encouraged him to add this piece that would be so powerful for women. And I would not be sitting here today if it weren't for this component of the Civil Rights Act. And I think why I'm in this aside is sometimes our politics of purity, the idea that we can only even listen to people who we already agree with about a series of topics is actually hamstringing us. And we have to think about, am I willing to have a strange bedfellow in order to make the progress that we need? And that's why we need contrarians. We need people who are going to disagree with us, and we need to consider holding them close so that we can come up with better ideas at the end of the day. I'm wondering if anyone, Janet, I'm looking at your face and I'm like, do you disagree with me? Do we get to have another moment of fun?
It's gonna be fun. I don't disagree with you. Everything about the contrarians, but that particular example, what came up for me was, you know, since we're talking about politics here. One of the biggest issues, and it may just be that example, the whole break with feminism, is that now it's being called white feminism as opposed to just feminism. And one other way, the fourth way of looking at that is, that women recognized that white women recognized that they could lean into his supremacy and make sure that they got into that conversation. Because, we talk about how with the election, 53% of white women voted the way they did and essentially voted against their own interest. And the argument is, we will vote race over gender every day. And that a lot of Black women now look at that and say, okay, we Black women get called on to be the saviors, to be the ones to fix things. And every time we do, when it comes time to step up, we get told, go away. And so that particular one, that's why you were getting that face with me. I was like, yeah, well, I can see another reason why that might have happened. But your point about being able to have contrarians and talk to people you don't agree with, because I do think that that is one of the biggest issues with the polarization now. We only see it in a binary way. And there are times when, there are folks that I wouldn't give the time of day before things started happening now, that when they say to me things like, so do you think, like Cleo said, do you think that some of the stuff you guys did in the DEI space, do you think maybe that could have been what led to, this backlash? And I have to sit around and say, maybe so. Point. And my point is then, okay, what are we going to do about it? I'm never fine with, okay, you have a point. What are we going to do? If we agree, what are we together going to go for? Because what I don't like when that happens is then if you go get binary again, okay, so you agree with me, so let's go down my path. We got to go down the path together. And I think if we start doing that, we can, move some of these log jams that we're dealing with right now. But so I don't disagree.
I have so much to say no, but I think you're right. And I think that you put it so well. It's interesting what you're saying. Feminism, white feminism, mainstream feminism that we learn about in history books. We always are learning the white feminism. Black feminism has been erased from most history of the feminist movement. And it's a shame. And it is really, a huge part of the problem. In case anyone's only listening and not watching, I am a white woman. So I just want to make that clear. And I think that this is important because there is a history of white feminism that has not only said to Black women, take a back seat, but instead, we will take all of your labor, we will take all of your efforts, and we will then erase you from the gains that are built from that progress. And so I do think the onus is on white women in many ways to figure out how we're going to expand our understanding of what being a woman is, to figure out how to remove the culture of white supremacy that is so ingrained inside of us, and to let go of what's the word? The attraction of proximity to power.
Mhm.
It is
Yeah.
so addictive to be close to power, and being a white woman allows you to be proximate. But you need to recognize that that proximity is not the same as having it,
Mhm.
and recognize that our struggles are bound up with each other. And so I do think there's a whole other podcast episode about this. There's several books about this. The book that I started writing in my head after 2020 was Dear Karen, Letters to Myself.
Love it.
And the ways the ways that we as white women, especially well-meaning white women, have a lot of work to do to undo some of white supremacy culture within ourselves. But on to your point about what DEI could be versus what it is, I think there's this idea, let's burn it all down. First of all, what does that look like? I'm not sure. And second of all, I've gotten pretty obsessed with the idea of a controlled burn, or the cultural practice in some communities of burning specific things in order to generate regrowth.
Mhm.
You
Okay.
don't just let the whole thing burn. We see what happens when wildfires are out of control. But when we can control that burn, when we can say, let's protect this piece, but let this piece go, that's where growth really happens. I'm a gardener. I'm kind of obsessed with biological, ecological metaphors. And to me, that's a really powerful one. We can't burn it all down, but we might need to erase some things so that there's room for new growth.
I love that.
And again, Allison, part of what you're talking about is nuance. And I feel like the conversation has lacked nuance in a lot of instances. And so you have folks that say, the system is fine, leave it alone. You'll progress as you should. If you're smart, work hard enough, do the things you need to do. And then you do have a lot of folks that are like, no, burn it all down. All the power systems are wrong. Everything is broken. None of this is right. Either one of those are incredibly fear-inducing for folks that don't want to engage in this work. And so I think that, and Janet talks about this all the time, like everyone has been afraid for quite some time. There's a lot of fear in a lot of different spaces. And I think the nuance that you're talking about, whether it's around courageous conversations or around controlled burns, is this idea of it's not all right. It's not all wrong. We have to be deliberate about how are we engaging with one another? How are we understanding where it is that we're trying to go? Janet, to your point, how are we not assuming positive intent, but stating our intent and moving this conversation to a more productive place, because it feels like it just has not been there for quite some time. And all of us being entrenched in the places that we are is not allowing us to move forward, because we are truly entrenched. We're not moving toward one another. We're not moving forward. And the world is continuing to spin around us, and in some instances spinning a bit out of control. So it's an interesting dynamic. And Janet, I want you to get in, but Allison, I do want you to talk about, so what should individuals be doing? But we can come back to that, because Janet, I know you had a thought, because we're talking about
I was going to say, you just basically led us to our second part of, okay, so what do we do right now? And I think you're right that we should be, we can talk about companies. Let's talk about what individuals can do. You've already said some of that when you were talking about how we can have agency over our own ability to belong. What can individuals do? Short of saying, just go speak up and say something when they're worried about this space, and maybe first they should use your model, we know that, but assuming that they don't necessarily, or they're in a place that doesn't happen, what can I do in a space where I may be afraid I'm gonna lose my job? What can I do? What can I do right now to actually move the needle?
Yeah, and I think this is such an important question. It's the question so many of us hold in our hearts. And it's also, forgive me, nuanced, because we all have different strengths, right? And so we're all going to have a different thing that we can bring to this conversation. There's a model for what's my role in a social change ecosystem. And there are so many different roles that are required. Some people need to be bridge builders. They need to be just building bridges between different spaces. Some people need to be healers. So how are you going around helping people heal? We also need storytellers. We need people on the front lines. We need people asking for too much so that we can find the middle ground. We have all of these different roles to play, but in a workplace setting, and I see this happen with my students all the time, especially undergraduates, you might feel, I felt so strongly this desire to have my voice be heard. If I just name this problem with the system, then I know that people will start to notice it and then try to fix it. And so part of one thing we all need is a giant dose of humility, that I am not the first person to recognize this problem. I'm not the first person to point this problem out. I'm not the first person to try to solve it. And so one thing I need to do is go about finding the other people who have already tried these things and learn from them. Find my people, as you were saying before, Janet. But I also need to recognize from that internal locus of control, what am I capable of? And what am I not capable of in this moment? If you are early in your career, you are probably not going to be able to shift the profit model of your organization. Good luck. They just aren't going to listen to you. I had a wonderful student who experienced some of the challenges of the healthcare system and what it's like to need healthcare within a system that's broken. And then he was going into healthcare private equity. And he asked, so what can I do to fix healthcare? And I was like, well, first you need people to respect you. And that means you need to be good at your job. And so you can't go in and have the first thing you say and the only thing you say be, this isn't working. You need people to listen to you. You need to build up your credibility. You need to be respected. So that's one piece of advice I have for everyone, is be good at what you do. Be really good at it. Megan Rapinoe, when she was retiring from soccer, said that, and they lost the World Cup. She said, someone asked, like, what are you disappointed in losing? And she said, one of the things that's hard about losing is I know people listen to me more when we win. And so we have to find a way to keep winning so that people keep listening to us. We also need to look for alliances and coalitions that we can become a part of, and especially try to identify sponsors. So those people who will put their credibility on the line in order to support you, who are also engaged and interested in these ideas. And these might be people you do not expect to have your back, but they might show up in ways that you'll be surprised by. You also need to take care of yourself. Find your people, find those spaces where you can be okay. You can't pour from an empty cup, as they say. And if you're emotionally dysregulated because you're so upset about what's going on, or you're so negatively impacted by what's going on, you're not going to be very effective in your communication anyway. So you need to have confidence, clarity. You need to come with an ethic of care, but you also need to have contextual intelligence and a sense of conviction that will get you to where you're going. And so my advice, and I learned this one the hard way, is not just raise your hand in every meeting and say your piece about what's going wrong, but instead be very intentional about what your purpose is, who the audience is that you're connecting with, the context you're operating within, and then go about it with a strategy or an intentionality.
I so love that. Uh, what really resonated with me was where you made the point about we have to know what our strengths are. This bullshit book that I'm writing, Belonging is Bullshit, one of the things in it, one of the models in it asks people to think about what their perspective on equity is, because we think that everybody thinks the same way and we don't. But the way you believe, what you believe ultimately equity looks like will determine how you do inclusion. And my point there is, when you read those categories, some people will go, well, are you, saying that one's better than the other? No, my point is exactly what you're saying. We need every kind of person in this work. So it's sort of like the argument we always make for allies, where people will say, well, I don't have enough power, or I can't stand up in a meeting and say something. And we always say to them, there's so many ways to do this. So I think the point that you can make for individuals that you said so beautifully was, figure out what it is that you can do from where you are and do that thing, but do not assume that there's only one thing that can be done. And if everybody's doing whatever they're good at, then eventually you might be able to move the needle on this stuff. And so I really, really love to hear that. And I mean, and I wonder though, how do people figure out what it is that they're good at? How do people figure out what their communication style is? How do they figure, if they haven't done it before, how do they figure out what it is, other than the fact, once they realize they're good at what they do, how do they figure out then how they can lean into trying to make change?
Wow, now you're getting at my other passion. So another class I teach is on personal branding and professional relationships. And what I require every student who takes that class to do, and when I lead workshops on it, I require every workshop participant to do is send out a survey to at least 10 people that they have worked with, asking specific questions about how they are perceived. And when have you seen me at my best? If I were a kitchen appliance, which one would I be?
I love that.
What do you view my strength as? It's always interesting, the kitchen appliance one, because some people are a blender, but some people are a ninja blender. And it's like, okay, this person, like, they really knew you. But I think that we are so bad at recognizing our strengths. We are so bad at it. And it's because it's kind of what comes easiest to us in a lot of ways. And so we need other people to tell us, this is what I see your value as. One of my dear friends, Jenny Fink, I know that we met through Jenny, actually. She once told me that one of my biggest strengths was that I was creative. And I was like, what? I can't draw for the life of me. And she said, that's not what I mean. Constantly coming up with ideas, not taking this won't work for an answer, always trying something new, trying to figure out what the next best step is. And only once she said that could I recognize it in my daily life and all the ways that it was showing up. And then to answer the second part of your question, Janet, can I start to think about, okay, what role does creativity have in this project that I believe in to undo the systems that have created inequity? Well, it might mean I just try a bunch of stuff. I just go out there and I keep putting ideas out there. I write, I teach a different way every time. I throw it at the door and see what sticks, because that might be the thing that moves someone else who's really, really good at strategic thinking to then take that and move with that element. And this is why I love teaching with other people. I believe that collaboration is the future, because we are just all so unique. And what I do is different than what both of you do. And that's why we all have to be here together talking.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I love that. I mean, that's the whole argument we make in general about why diversity matters, right? Is that you want those different perspectives. And I think what we tend to do is we tend to all lean into what we believe are the right ones. And if we're not that, then we don't do anything, or we think that we have limited agency to do anything. And just imagine if everybody did what it is they're good at, heading in the same direction. We probably wouldn't be where we are right now. Yeah, we probably be moving the needle a little bit more, I would think. I think, yeah, I agree with you 100%. Khalil, what else we want to talk about what we can do right now? What's coming up for you?
Oh, I mean, there's so much other stuff that we could talk about, but I'm just curious, Allison, anything else that you feel like organizations, individuals should be paying attention to in this moment to prepare us? Because again, our whole, kind of conversation this season has been about what's next, which you answered, right? 24 months from now, where are we going to be? And what's now? What are the things that are happening? Because those are so connected, right? The things that we're doing today are going to set us up for the future. Where we want to be in the future should inform what we're doing today. You've given us some really great guidance around courageous conversations, around how to find our personal brand, around how to kind of make it all fit. Is there anything else that you want to leave folks with around things we should be doing today, things we should be thinking about for the future, or the relationship and the intersection between them?
Yes. One thing that I really think organizations need to figure out is how they're going to maintain a productive, engaged, existent labor force with all of the changes that are coming our way. People, first of all, our population growth is slowing in the United States in general. There are going to be fewer workers. The workers that are currently in positions of power are going to be retiring. Our workforce is aging. And when younger generations come into positions of power, they expect different things. So by 2030, Generation Z and millennials will make up 76% of the workforce. 76%. And we know from countless surveys that millennials and Generation Z care about values-driven work. We care about doing work. I'm a millennial. Again, even if you're looking at me, you don't know that, but I'm a millennial. I identify as an elder millennial. And we care about doing work that we believe in, that we think provides value. Now, we don't all agree on what that value is. We don't all believe in the same things, but we believe in values-driven work. And Generation Z believes it so much that they aren't really willing to do work for an organization that isn't also invested in them, right? That's why you see all of this stuff about Generation Z being lazy. And I think that it's important to recognize that these people who we say are lazy, that we say like they don't want to work, they are the future of the workforce, whether we like it or not. And we're about to run into some real trouble because according to Deloitte's 2025 Gen Z and Millennial Survey, only 6% of Generation Z say their primary career goal is to become a leader.
Wow.
So who's going to lead? Who's going to lead? And it seems like, based on the research that we're seeing, that that's because they don't like the leaders they're working for. And specifically, they don't find managers to be doing what they hoped managers would do. And so I want organizations to pay really particular and specific attention to the role of the people leader, the role of the manager. Because young people expect managers to be support systems and mentors, to provide guidance, and increasingly to provide learning and development opportunities. But leaders expect managers to make that bottom line happen. And this is why managers are burning out because there's so many expectations on them. Thinking back to incivility, a lot of people say that it was their managers that created environments that were welcoming to incivility. And so we've all worked for somebody who was good at it, and we've all worked for somebody who was bad at it. And you can feel the difference. So organizations need to pay really close attention to how they can support people leaders and perhaps reform or get rid of the ones who are creating threatening environments in ways that can create a positive learning and development opportunity. I think it's 25 to 30% of Generation Z thinks they're going to change jobs in the next 2 years.
Wow.
How do you be the workplace that people want to be at? How do you bring the best talent to your organization and make them not want to leave? That is the question that you should be asking yourself when you wake up, and you should be asking yourself when you go to bed when you are a CEO.
Yeah, Allison, we're going to have you come back for season 3 so we
Yeah.
can dig into that, because I feel like there's so much going on there. And I talk to leaders all the time, and I feel like there's a lot of unintentional finger pointing between different levels in the organization, because you talk to managers and they'll say, well, the incivility is coming from direct reports that are uncivil to one another and have really high expectations, but, want the training, the development, the coaching, the support, want me to know that their dog isn't doing well, but also don't want to answer emails on the weekends, but want to get promoted and want to make more money, but also don't want to work as much as everybody did and want to have it all. So they want to have a family and this and this and that. But and to your point, those middle managers are like, go back 30 years and I just needed to be a manager. I didn't need to worry about how you were feeling and your mental health and all these other things. I didn't need to worry about the competition and all that's going on. And so everyone feels like there's all of this additional responsibility and pressure, and we're not willing to let any of it go. And so we want employees to do more. We want managers to do more. We want executives to do more. And Janet and I have chatted about, we want our executives to be human, but not too human, right? I want you to be human, but I actually don't care if you were up super late with your baby because you can't snap at me, right? Like, that's not okay. I might be okay with that because I get it. I'm a human. I didn't sleep well, but as an executive, figure it out. And, be somebody that I look up to, but don't make too much money. But it's all of these things. And I feel like we're at this point where we've got to figure out, how do we do some of the things that you've been coaching us to, which is, how do we have conversations? How do we take a step back and recognize none of us is perfect? All of us are trying. How do we move these things forward? And what are the parts of the system where we need a controlled burn? And some of that may be about compensation models. It may be about the roles and responsibilities of certain leaders in certain organizations. It may be about what we expect from one another. But I feel like there's like 2 or 3 more podcasts that more episodes that we should be having to really dig into all of this and all of the amazing things that you're raising here.
And we're going to call it
I
controlled
hear you
burn.
trying to
I'm
make
on
me
that one.
stop.
Yeah, we're going to call the next one
Yay!
controlled
Okay,
burn.
good.
I love that.
There we go.
I can't wait. And I know you're trying to shut me up, but I told
never.
you that interrupting is my challenge, my growth area. One of the things you asked me to think about in not so many words is, what's giving me hope, or where do I see our biggest opportunities for breakthrough? And I think about this at an organizational level, but also at a societal level when it comes to making progress on systemic inequities. And I think that where my hope is coming from is from actually a sad, hard place. So many people are suffering and struggling right now. People cannot afford to live anywhere. People are experiencing exploitation. We know that white men are having actually a really challenging time in this labor market, just like the rest of us. And people are confused, they're scared. Okay, I promised I'd get to hope. So if we're all feeling that, there is a possibility that we can harness it and use it as a way to show that we are all in this together, and that when I make progress for me, I'm making progress for you. When you make progress for you, you're making progress for me. So I wanted to share this quote from Leela Watson. She's an Australian artist, activist, and educator who's focused on Indigenous and Aboriginal rights there. And she says, "If you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together." And to take that one step farther, Bell Hooks suggests how we can do that. And she says it's love. And so one more quote for you. The moment we choose to love, we begin to move against domination, against oppression. The moment we choose to love, we begin to move towards freedom, to act in ways that liberate ourselves and others. That action is the testimony of love as the practice of freedom. And so my hope comes from moments just like this, where we are getting together, we're disagreeing, but we're finding what it is that we believe in alongside each other. And we're trying to work with people who we have some things in common with and some things different than, to make a better future for all of us and for generations to come.
That up.
Allison, thank you so much for your time, for your expertise, for welcoming us into a different version of your classroom and what all of your students are so fortunate to get on a regular basis. And I'm sure there were lots of people furiously taking notes and rewinding and quoting and pulling things out. And so thank you for this conversation. And a little plug for thank you for the conversations that we will have, next season and coming up, in the future.
And we will definitely drop the links that you gave us. They'll be available with the podcast when it's on the website. People can access that. So thank you for that too. Appreciate that.
And thank you both. I was going to mention this way back when we were talking about belonging, but I just really feel like this is a space where I can bring my perspective, that I could bring my values and share them. I feel heard and I feel a part of this group, and that is an invaluable experience. So thank you very much for this invitation and for this opportunity to speak with you.
So Janet, of course, people know that it is not an In This Moment episode unless we do our 3 key takeaways. So I'll kick off. I really appreciated, as you and Allison were talking about, assigning positions, right? Don't let people stay silent because they're afraid of being judged, but you can't just ask people to jump in. Create structured ways for people to engage with different perspectives, even if it's uncomfortable. So that was absolutely something that jumped out.
Exactly. And, you heard me saying over and over again that what I appreciated so much was Allison's talking about find your role and find your people. And the fact that it takes all kinds to do this work, we need everybody's unique abilities to do it. There is no one right way to do it, and we need everything. And for me, the power of that is it's giving you the agency to actually do something, even if you think you're not in the right role, but from the seat you're in. Find your role and find your people.
Yeah, love that. And your word of agency could not resonate more. And then the last of our 3 for today, teach the skills, right? Courageous communication isn't natural for most people. Organizations need to actively teach employees how to disagree productively and listen across differences. Because if we're not doing that, we're just asking people, go have difficult conversations, or we're telling them, go figure out your agency. Teaching the skills, being really deliberate, being really intentional and explicit, that came through loud and clear. And so those were our 3 key takeaways for this particular conversation. And we're excited for the next in a wide variety of conversations.
Exactly. And we will see you next time. Thanks for joining us on In This Moment. Find today's resources at inthismoment.network and connect with us on LinkedIn. And if this was valuable, subscribe and review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcast. It helps other leaders find us. Stay ready for what's next.